Good morning. This is the editor's desk, and I'm here with Matthew Keys. Matt, how are you?
Good this morning. How are you doing, Rick?
I'm doing very well. All right. We're going to pick up on a conversation that we got to at the end of last week's show. And that is that in the face of uncertain and very possibly strongly negative economic news for consumers, we are going to find that streaming subscribers have or feel that they will have, be careful about that, less disposable income. That they will look at their streaming subscriptions and say, yeah, I don't need this. Yeah, I don't really need that. Can I drop this one and come back and get it later? And I think we're going to see more of that pressure. Do you think that's about right?
Well, I think we're already starting to see it, right? If you look at the Netflix came out with their earnings last week. This is the first time that they didn't report a hard subscriber count. And one of the things that I put on LinkedIn is to analysts that have been paying attention for a while, you've seen the domestic market peak, what they call the domestic market Netflix considers to be US and Canada. That's considered the most mature streaming market in the world. And they have, at times reversed and gone in the other direction, not growth, but have shrunk their subscriber base domestically. It's pretty stable right now, but it hovers around that 78 to 80 million subscriber mark. So when they talk about growth, they're really talking about overseas growth, where in some of the markets, it's not quite as mature. And so what you've got Netflix doing now is saying, we're not going to focus on subscriber growth because what matters is how much money are we earning? How engaged are our consumers? And I guess there's an argument to be made with that. For someone like me that is interested in those subscriber figures, the fact that Netflix broke that down on a geographic basis was very interesting to me. That's data that is still valid and will continue to be for a few years as we look at other services that are coming to market. More to your point, there was a headline a week ago that said that consumer sentiment has plummeted to its lowest level since the 1950s. Its second lowest level since the 1950s, rather, which means consumers are already starting to think about how is the broader economy going to affect my wallet. Streaming, to your point, probably not the thing that people consider to be a necessity, especially viewed in the sense of entertainment. There are many other places where you can get your entertainment. But since that's the thing that you and I are experts in, that's what we'll be focusing on.
That's what we're going to focus
today.
On. Okay. Yes. So we used to say, and obviously I've been in the cable business since the last century and well into the last century. We used to say the cable TV was recession-proof. Okay? That people would always have cable TV at numbers that are roughly the same kind of penetration that Netflix has. Netflix has how many homes? 80 million out of 130 million TV households?
That's a count for the U.S. and Canada. So
okay, all right. So that's more than that number of households. Well, cable TV was healthy at 50-ish% penetration of U.S. TV households. So I think Netflix is got to be pretty close to that number. All right. Mm-hmm. Now, if cable TV was recession-proof, the services that were on top of that, the one that I worked with, which was Showtime and HBO, which were additional premium services add-on, were absolutely not recession-proof. We lost 50% of our subscribers every year, no matter what. And we had to work like crazy to regain those. But cable TV per se was recession-proof. Jump that forwards now 40 years, and I think we know certainly that broadband is recession-proof. Everybody's got to have broadband. It's treated like a utility. You got to have that, along with your water and your electricity and your sewer, which broadband sometimes resembles. That is recession-proof, and I would argue that some streaming subscription, not a specific one, but something, is always going to be there in some homes. And I think arguably that's going to be Netflix. That's the one with the largest penetration, the deepest penetration into the homes, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so now the analogy that we talked about when we were warming up was that in the subscription world, somewhat akin to in the retail bricks and mortar world, there's an anchor. In shopping malls, it was usually Macy's. You'd go into the mall, you'd go into Macy's, and then you'd wander up and down the hallways to get a pretzel here and a pizza there and go look at shoes and go look at jewelry or whatever else you wanted to do. But that one big store was the anchor. I think Netflix could be called an anchor in the world of streaming and maybe the world of bundles. That if Paramount is going to bundle up with Peacock and maybe bundle up with Warner, if they could bundle up with Netflix, which Netflix has no interest in doing, of course, but if they could bundle up with Netflix, then all of a sudden you've got a consumer proposition that has real stickiness. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay, so now let's talk about what bundling really means to the consumer. The analogy we used is that you've got three $10 services, but you buy all three of them and it's only $25. The way that works is if you decide, I haven't watched that other one all that much, I'm going to drop it, your price goes from 25 down to 20. Yeah, you save money, but you don't save the whole $10. And to a certain degree, that kind of pricing strategy overcomes what you would call a weak month with your programming, where you don't have the big hit that I want. Now, what you want and what I want is always different. So if there's not the big hit that appeals to everyone, the bundle tends to make the whole thing more sticky. So then I'm going to come back to what our strategy was when we had to launch Showtime. Here you go, guys. There's the old guy talking again. When we had to launch Showtime back in the 70s and 80s into markets that already had HBO. HBO was there. They had brand awareness. They had deep penetration. They had tons of marketing money. We sold Showtime as the best complement to HBO. We talk about borrowed interest, and it drove HBO ever-loving batty. They sued the pants off us. I don't think they ever succeeded. Because all we were saying is to the consumer, you got HBO, now you got to have Showtime with it because it makes it all better. Mm-hmm. In today's world, if we said, you've got Netflix, we know you've got Netflix, hell, everybody's got Netflix, this is the service that works best on top of Netflix. And then the question is, does anybody have the gonads to do that marketing and say, you know what, we're the perfect complement to Netflix? Now, does that ring any bells with the data that you're seeing out there?
Yeah, to some degree. As you were speaking, I was pulling up the case law for HBO versus Showtime at Showtime and the movie channel, because they were
we were one company.
They were together. And HBO's crux was how to, and you affirmed this, how the bundle was being marketed. They thought, and I think this is kind of a unpersuasive argument, and I think the court found the same. They thought that the slogans that were being used in the promotions would make it seem like HBO and Showtime had merged. And keep in mind, this was before the internet, when most people could go out and do their own research, for better or for worse. So advertising in that sense was highly influential, and there were very few ways to kind of check into the validity of certain claims. Whether those claims went too far, I think that was a matter for HBO, considered that to be a matter for the courts to decide. I don't think anybody's arguing that HBO is recession-proof anymore.
No. Hell, HBO doesn't even exist anymore. The anchor service, and boy, this is a criminal offense, was eliminated in favor of something called Max. Oh, my God.
Yeah, I understand why Max is a thing. I appreciate Max. We enjoy it in our household. I think they're doubling back a little bit on some of their branding. We've seen that happen within the past few weeks. Who knows how long Max will be around? The service itself is never going to go away. How they choose to market it or brand it, maybe a conversation for another time. But I want to ask you real quick, because as you're talking, I'm pulling up this different data, these different reports. I'm thinking about, what is the recession-proof service? I don't necessarily agree that it's Netflix, but I don't disagree with that sentiment either. I just want to add something to it. But before I do, we were talking about cable TV penetration rates. And I have data that shows that there's a particular time in history when cable penetration was at its highest, 60% of households subscribing to cable. What year do you think is the year that cable TV peaked?
95, 96.
Pretty close. 1992.
Okay.
And when we think about that year in particular, what was happening around that time where cable TV would have peaked and started to see a little bit more of a...
Oh, I know exactly why that happened. I left Showtime in 91, so after that it all went to hell in a handbasket.
Okay, that aside, right?
What happened in 92 with cable TV? First of all, MTV was a monster driver of cable TV, okay? But I think HBO was the thing that actually rang the cash registers that people called in and said, I want HBO. And at the front office, they said, you got to have cable to get that. But you tell me, what happened in 92?
Okay, well, you're thinking of programming, but think more platforms.
Oh, the Death Star. No, that wasn't until 97. DirecTV didn't happen until 97. What happened in 92?
So there were predecessors to DirecTV that
Prime
on the market.
Yeah,
you had Prime Star and USSB, I think is what it was called.
Well, USSB was the partner of DirecTV, and that was owned by Hubbard, Hughes Hubbard.
Long story short, there was a service that the cable companies together came in on, and I think that might have been USSB. And then there was Prime Star, which was his own thing. There was EchoStar had Dish Network that came a few years later. Eventually, USSB and Prime Star merged into DirecTV. They were acquired by DirecTV, and that's how you wound up with two. But you could buy satellite dishes for your backyard, those huge things for your backyard.
Oh, yeah.
And for a while, you could even get cable programming for free. Another conversation for another time. But it dovetails very nicely into HBO's business model, and that of other services as well. But in the early 90s, all of a sudden the dishes became smaller.
Yep.
And you could get cable TV programming in parts of the country where you couldn't because they were coast to coast. It's actually a big reason why DirecTV had the Sunday ticket for as long as they did, because the NFL couldn't see partnering with somebody else who had a regional lock on a market and maybe even in the major markets, but cut a lot of the middle of the country out. So that all of a sudden you've got competition in the cable TV space, right? And cable TV as a platform started to decline a little bit. That was the peak. The peak was 92, and from then on it was in a slow decline, but certainly not a death spiral.
But subscription television continued to grow because you had the
subscription television took another form, right? All of a sudden there was more competition in the subscription TV space, and streaming became a platform in and of itself that some of the cable and satellite companies have opted into, and some have chosen to compete against. And there's a lot of overlap and in between. But the reason why I bring that up is because streaming, for the reasons I just said, is another form of pay TV. It's another form of competition. If you're Netflix, there are certainly Netflix bundles on the market, not effectuated by Netflix itself. You can go to Verizon. If you're a Verizon customer, you can get bundles with Netflix that will save you based on the retail cost of each service alone. I think they bundle with Max.
But you have to have Verizon Wireless
Verizon
to do it. So you
Verizon to get it,
you
that's
gotta
right.
be paying, $88 a month for Verizon Wireless to save $3 on Netflix.
That's right.
EFP.
So in that sense, it's that's the anchor. Verizon would be the anchor.
And arguably wireless service is recession proof. The same way broadband is.
Yeah, the broadband being recession proof, I think streaming is just a small element to that.
That's right.
More the idea that so much happens over broadband.
Everything happens over broadband.
It's an expectation. And broadband, we're using broadband analogous to high-speed internet. They're, for purposes of this conversation, they're one and the same. Broadband means a lot of things to a lot of different people and companies, but here we're talking mostly about the internet.
Yep.
Which is you get streaming on it, you can pay your bills on it. There's a lot of different things you can do on the internet, and the expectation is that you'll have it in some form.
But my point about streaming is that not a specific streaming services, although Netflix could be crowned like that, but that some streaming is recession proof.
Yeah, and I think
subscribers are going to have something.
I think the streaming services that are recession proof are the ones that offer more than just their own service to consumers. And the one that immediately comes to mind that offers more is Prime Video, which is not necessarily a standalone service, although you can buy it as a standalone service. But if we take that shopping mall analogy, it just happens to be that they're also part of an e-commerce business. But if we take the shopping mall analogy, the service that is most analogous to that is Prime Video as the anchor, because if you have a Prime Video subscription,
that's interesting.
Suddenly you can go out and buy a subscription to Max. You can go out and buy bundles that are similar to what you have with Verizon, but you also get more. If you're a Prime member, you get Prime Video included, plus the ability to tack on all of these subscriptions. But you also get things like 2-day shipping, unlimited ability to upload photos to the cloud, and things like that. And I'm pulling up there's a research study from Parks Associates that shows that based on their own evaluation of subscriber data, the financials, their own consumer surveys, that for the last 3 years, Prime Video has actually exceeded Netflix in subscription penetration in the US. So more people have access to Prime Video than anything else. And what we've seen, the influence that Prime Video has on emerging streaming services. There was a study by Antenna last year that came out that showed that Amazon was driving something like 50% of new SVOD sales to niche streaming services available within their marketplace. But 50% overall of new subscriptions to these niche streamers were coming from the Prime Video marketplace in the first half of last year. So if we look at streaming as a shopping mall and we think about which services are recession proof, until Netflix really ups their game and brings more live tentpole programming to their platform, which they're working to do because I think they see what you see. I think they see where this is going. They, I think, are still a little subject to the consumer thought of what is discretionary. Am I really watching things on Netflix on a regular basis to justify the $8 a month that I spend on ads or the $15.50 on the ad-free version? My parents are in this camp. My parents dropped their Netflix subscription about 2 years ago, and they've never felt the need to sign on. They watch BritBox and YouTube and Prime Video, and that's about it. That's all they watch.
All right. Hang on.
My parents are probably an anomaly. That I don't know that that's representative of every consumer, but the thing is that there are people that are price sensitive that are thinking about Netflix and whether they really need it or not. So I wouldn't confuse Netflix being the biggest service, even in this market, with them being the most bulletproof, because I think the most bulletproof are the ones that have added value, not just to their own service, but to other services as well.
Well, I'll give you one that's probably bulletproof, and then we got to go because we got to try to keep to our 20 minutes.
We're on time,
And that is, it's very possible that the recession-proof services are folks like Pluto. They're just
the free streamers,
free.
Yeah.
They're just free. And if those guys marketed more effectively, they might be able to add on some pay TV services on top of the bundle. Anyway, we're going to go.
Part two. Yep.
That's for part 2. That's it for this week. And we'll see everybody next week on the editor's desk. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.